I used to think exhaustion was just part of being an adult, but the kind I felt every morning was different. It was the kind that sits in your chest and makes you dread the sound of your own alarm. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds before I heard my boyfriend, Mark, call my name from the kitchen, with that irritated tone he used when he wanted something. Those first few moments of the day always felt like bracing for a storm I pretended wasn't coming. We lived in a small rental house outside town, nothing fancy, but it was mine before he moved in. I'd sorted out the deposit, the lease, the bills. I worked long shifts at a neighborhood grocery store, the kind where you remember regulars by what cigarettes they buy or which bread they prefer. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid steady enough, and I liked the simple rhythm of it. When Mark lost his job at the auto shop, I didn't hesitate to offer him a place. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself he just needed a little time. At first, it really did feel temporary. He'd help with dishes sometimes. He cooked once or twice. He talked about finding work again soon. But that talk slowly faded into vague excuses about the job market and how no one respected people with real hands-on skills anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be the nagging girlfriend who pushed too hard. So I quietly picked up the extra groceries, covered the rising electric bill, and tried not to wince when he flipped on every light in the house like we lived in a stadium. The early signs didn't look like abuse, not in a dramatic sense. They were small things. Him taking my car without asking, leaving tools on the living room floor, inviting his friends over without warning. When I brought it up, he'd sigh in that heavy way that suggested I was making problems out of nothing. He called it sharing a life, but it felt more like I was slowly giving mine away, one inconvenience at a time. Then came the money comments. Harmless at first. "You make more than I do right now, babe. You're better with budgeting. You already pay the rent, so it just makes sense." Logical on the surface, but somehow every one of those comments twisted into him contributing less and expecting more. If I hesitated, he'd act wounded. "I thought we were a team," he'd say, even though the only team effort happening was me carrying both halves. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad. Plenty of couples had uneven seasons. Plenty of people struggled. But the imbalance grew so gradually that I didn't notice how much of myself I'd rearranged around his comfort. I'd skip lunch to stretch groceries. I'd put off buying new shoes for work because he needed gas money. I'd come home after a 10-hour shift and find him on the couch, scrolling his phone with the heater blasting, even though the bill was already overdue. The tension built quietly, like dust gathering in corners. Nothing loud enough to call out directly, but always enough to feel. I felt it when he asked for my debit card, just for a minute. I felt it when he shrugged off things I needed, but insisted on small luxuries for himself. And I felt it most when I caught myself apologizing before I even spoke. The moment I realized something was really wrong wasn't dramatic. It was painfully ordinary. I opened my banking app one night after work and stared at a balance I couldn't explain. A handful of small charges, fast food, energy drinks, random little purchases made while I was shelving produce and smiling at customers. My card in his wallet. And for the first time in months, something inside me finally said, "Pay attention." I didn't confront him that night. I just sat on the edge of the bed, still in my work shirt, staring at the numbers on my phone. The charges weren't huge individually, but together, they filled in a picture I'd been avoiding. I felt stupid for not noticing sooner. Stupid for trusting him with something as basic as my debit card. Stupid for letting the temporary situation stretch into something permanent without ever saying it out loud. The next morning, he was already in the kitchen, rummaging through cabinets like a man searching for treasure. He didn't even look up when he said, "We out of coffee? You gotta grab more." Not we, me. Always me. I opened the fridge and saw the leftovers I'd brought home from work missing. He'd eaten them, again. He laughed it off when I asked, "You weren't gonna finish it." The way he said it made it sound like I should thank him. A few days later, the electric company sent a warning notice. I had paid what I could, but the bill kept climbing because he left the heater running all night. When I mentioned it gently, he rolled his eyes. So turn it off yourself. I was cold. No apology. No acknowledgement that I was the one covering everything. Just annoyance that I dared inconvenience him with the reality of the bills he wasn't paying. That same week, he came home with a brand new jacket. A nice one. Something I knew he couldn't afford. When I asked how he paid for it, he smirked. I borrowed your card for a sec. You were in the shower. My chest went tight. I wasn't angry at the jacket itself. I was angry at how casual he was about taking from me. Like it was his right. Like my work, my money, my effort somehow belonged to him. When I said he needed to stop using my card without asking, he scoffed. Relax. It's not like you're struggling. You're always stressing over nothing. But I was struggling. I was juggling bills like a circus act, stretching groceries until there was nothing left to stretch, even skipping meals when payday felt too far away. Yet somehow, in his version of reality, I was the unreasonable one. The breaking point hit on a Sunday morning. I had just finished a brutal week at the store. My back ached, and I finally had one day to breathe. I wanted to sleep in, but Mark flipped on the bedroom lights at 7 a.m. and said, "Get up, we gotta go shopping." I mumbled that I wanted to rest. He snapped, "You sleep all the time. We don't have food because you never plan ahead." I sat up, stunned. I was the one buying every grocery in that house. I was the one planning, budgeting, cooking, stretching leftovers. And he was lecturing me like I was irresponsible. When we got to the checkout line, he grabbed a stack of expensive snacks and tossed them on the belt. I put 2 of them back. He snatched them out of my hands and hissed, "Stop embarrassing me." That was the first time I felt something close to fear, not because he was loud, but because the entitlement in his voice was so sharp it felt like a warning. At home, he accidentally dropped my work bag in the hallway. My wallet fell out. When I told him to pick it up, he said, "You're getting real uptight lately. Maybe you need to calm down." That night, while he slept on the couch, surrounded by wrappers and crumbs, I sat alone in the bedroom. My bank account was nearly drained. My bills were behind. My food was gone. My energy was gone. And the person draining all of it didn't even see it. Something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not panic, just clarity. I was done. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to warn him. I was going to plan. The first thing I did was simple. I stopped reacting. No more sighs, no more reminders about bills, no more nudging him to look for work. I let him think I was slipping back into the same tired routine. I kept my tone even, my words short, my face neutral. It felt strange at first, almost like stepping outside myself, but it worked. He relaxed. He got careless. The second thing I did was open a new bank account during my lunch break. A separate debit card, a separate login. I rerouted my direct deposit before he even knew anything had changed. When the grocery store manager asked if everything was okay, I guess I looked worn down. I just said I was reorganizing finances. It wasn't a lie. Once my paycheck moved, I let the old account sit almost empty. Just enough to keep it from closing, not enough for him to use. I left the card in the same spot in my wallet so he wouldn't notice anything different. If he tried taking it again, he'd only find a few dollars. I didn't warn him. I didn't feel obligated to. Next, I started documenting things quietly. Not dramatic evidence, just the everyday stuff that added up. Screenshots of charges, photos of the messy house when he'd been home all day, the disconnect notices, the receipts he tossed aside. I didn't know if I'd need it, but collecting it made me feel grounded, like I wasn't imagining everything he dismissed. Meanwhile, I scaled back what I brought home. Smaller grocery hauls, cheaper meals. When he complained, I shrugged. Money's tight. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain. I let him stew in the confusion. If he wanted snacks or takeout, he'd have to figure it out. And he didn't, at least not at first. He kept expecting things to magically work like before. Eventually, he started asking questions. "Why's the fridge so empty? We're out of laundry pods again?" Why didn't you pay the electric bill on time? All I ever said was, I'm doing what I can. And I was. Just not for him. 3 weeks into my quiet plan, I dropped the bigger shift. I told him, calmly, that I needed the house back to myself for a while. I said I couldn't afford two adults living there without both contributing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I just stated it like a fact I'd already made peace with. He laughed at first, like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. When I didn't laugh with him, his face changed. What's that supposed to mean? It means you need to start packing, I said, still calm. You can go to your brother's for a bit. He scoffed so loudly I could smell the energy drink on his breath. I'm not going anywhere. This is our place. It's my lease, I reminded him. You're not on it. He stared at me, confused in a way that almost made me feel pity. Almost. Then he got angry, pacing, muttering about how ungrateful I was, how much he'd done for the house, how I was turning on him when he was having a rough time. His words bounced around the room, hollow. The more he talked, the more I realized how little he understood about everything I'd carried. He didn't pack. He didn't leave. He just sulked around the house like I'd insulted him. But the clock had already started. The following week, when rent came due, I paid it directly from my new account. When the landlord confirmed it, I asked, politely, if I could have the locks changed because someone who didn't belong on the lease refused to move out. He said yes. 2 days later, while Mark was out with friends, the locksmith arrived. I watched the old lock come off the door and felt something in my chest finally loosen. This time, the house would be mine again. Mark came home a little after 10, smelling like beer and fried food. I was sitting at the kitchen table, lights low, sorting through a stack of bills I could finally breathe around. He tried the door twice before it opened, his key useless now, then stumbled inside with a confused frown. What happened to the lock? He asked. I didn't look up right away. I had it changed. He blinked at me like he didn't understand English. Why would you do that? Because you don't live here anymore, I said, calm, steady, almost gentle. I told you to pack. You chose not to, he scoffed. You can't kick me out. I can, I said, and I already did. When I finally looked at him, the bravado in his face cracked. Maybe he expected screaming or a long argument he could twist back on me. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was just done. And he didn't know what to do with that. You're seriously throwing me out after everything I've dealt with? He snapped. I almost laughed. Everything you've dealt with? He started pacing, ranting about how unfair this was, how I was overreacting, how couples support each other. I let him talk. I'd heard these lines so many times, they barely meant anything anymore. When he started raising his voice, I stood up and pointed to the bag I'd packed earlier. His clothes, his toiletries, a few personal things. You can pick up the rest next week, I said, but tonight you're leaving. He tried one more angle, soft voice, sad eyes, a hand reaching for mine. Babe, I just need time. You know how hard things have been. I stepped back. I know exactly how hard things have been. For me. He swore under his breath, snatched the bag, and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the frame rattled. But the sound didn't scare me. It felt like the house exhaled for the first time in months. After he left, I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen counters were cluttered with his mess. Empty cans on the coffee table, clothes tossed over chairs. The heater humming unnecessarily, wasting money I didn't have to spare before. I turned it off. I opened windows. I gathered trash. It was late, but I didn't feel tired. I felt clear. The next morning, he started texting. First, we need to talk. Then, you blindsided me. Then a longer string of messages blaming me for everything. His job loss, his stress, his spending, even the bills I'd been quietly drowning under. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I'd already said everything I needed to say. By the second day, he switched tactics. I'm sorry. I messed up. I'll pay you back. I didn't respond to those either. By the end of the week, he demanded his things back immediately. I waited until his brother confirmed he'd pick them up, then left the boxes on the porch. I didn't want another confrontation. I didn't owe him access to my home ever again. When his brother came, he apologized. Not for Mark, but because he'd seen this pattern before. That told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few weeks, I caught up on bills, updated my passwords, and finally bought the pair of work shoes I'd been putting off for months. My paycheck stretched further than seemed possible. The house stayed quiet, clean, peaceful. I stopped waking up with dread in my chest. I could breathe without calculating every dollar in my head. One night, as I sat with a simple homemade dinner, and no one draining the fridge behind my back, I realized something. Revenge didn't have to be flashy. Sometimes it was just reclaiming the life someone tried to wear down piece by piece. Sometimes it was closing a door they thought they had a permanent right to walk through. Mark didn't face some dramatic downfall. He didn't lose his friends, or get arrested, or call crying from across the country. Real life isn't a movie. But he did lose the easy life he'd built on my back. He lost access to my money, my home, my patience, and my silence. And from what his brother later hinted, he struggled hard once he had to support himself again. That was enough. As for me, I learned something I should have known all along. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Tolerance isn't the same as kindness. And sometimes the smartest revenge is simply refusing to let someone keep taking from you. The house is mine again. My life is mine again. And that's the ending I needed.